are encouraged to have active imaginations, but as we grow up, it becomes more important to plant our feet firmly on the ground. That ethos is flatly rejected by the legions of Dungeons and Dragons fans. The iconic fantasy game turns 40 this year and is credited with expanding the mind of a generation. If it seems like a throwback to the 70s,
survival depends on a quick, decisive move. Choices are limited.
That's because it is. Introduced in 1974, Dungeons and Dragons, or D&D, mixed fantasy, role-playing, and traditional board games. Originally played with a book and multi-sided dice, the game spawned children's cartoons.
Fear not, stranger.
Several feature-length films. Made the leap into the internet age and attracted legions of devotees to live play conferences.
Find my orb, bring this thing to the dead dragon's tomb.
Cheesy? Maybe. Enduring? Definitely. The game has proven so popular it's achieved the lofty status of cultural touchstone.
Hey, Daniel, we're playing D&D tonight. You want to come?
It's pretty fun.
And the best part is, you get to pretend to be somebody you can't be in real life.
And that universal desire just might be the key to D&D's continuing appeal. Admittedly, this game isn't for everyone, but some of the most artistic minds of our time say it bolstered their creativity. My next guest is here to convince us of that. Ethan Gilsdorf is the author of Fantasy Freaks and Gaming Geeks and a self-professed geek himself. Welcome back to Greater Boston, Ethan. So, no surprise, all the male guests we've had on the show tonight have played Dungeons and Dragons. None of the women had. I'm being in the women category. I've never played. I mean, I know about it. My daughter used to play, but I don't know the first thing about it. Is it a dice game?
It's a dice play a role in the game, but really it's a storytelling game. I think that's probably the most simple way to describe it. And it just is a way for people to tell a story jointly around a table, face to face, with someone who's sort of like the omniscient narrator known as the Dungeon Master. Dice are involved for certain ways to determine outcomes of certain things that might happen to the character you're playing, but largely it's a verbal game.
So like Clue, do you pick your character?
Exactly. You pick character. You actually you're not limited to Colonel Mustard or those other characters. You can be Emily of the Woodland Realm if you want to be. Yeah. Exactly. And you would decide who your character is, and sort of their characteristics are determined partly by some dice, but there's a personality element to it, so the sort of more maybe nerdier players might adopt a certain voice, that might go with the character that shows when that character's acting out on something.
All right, being the competitive person I am, can you win it?
There is no win. There is no win.
No wonder I don't play.
Exactly, and that for many reasons, that might be a reason why the game isn't appealing to some people or perplexes them, because so many games, of course, have a win. There's an outcome. It's last man standing around the card table, whatever it is. With Dungeons and Dragons, there's no ending to the game. The games can last weeks and weeks and months. You stop it at one point, but the story continues. So think of it as an episodic television show where, we last left our heroes. They were, clinging to the precipice and about to fight the dragon. Sorry, guys, it's 11 o'clock. Got to go home to the wife and kids. But you play again the week after and take up the story.
So even your blog, you call it Dungeons and Dorkwads.
Yes.
There's this nerdy quality to it. What is the nerdy quality?
The nerdy quality is, partly it is this idea that you're playing a game that's more, I guess, ephemeral and ethereal in the sense that you're telling a story. It's taking place sort of in the collective imaginations, which for some people strikes people as a bit odd. The clip we saw showed people dressed in costume. You don't have to, in fact, you really don't play in costume, but I suppose you could bring some props. But the other aspect of the nerdiness of it is there are these rule books, which, this is one of mine from back in the day, from when I played as a teenager in the 1970s. Yeah. And these are rule books full of charts and tables that help you determine if your character, let's say her name is Emily of the Woodland Realm, wants to fire her arrow and kill that goblin. We roll this dice, and depending on what you roll, we consult the chart, and that determines whether or not you've successfully done it or not. So D&D is a weird game in that it can be compelling for the sort of storytelling, creative theater type people, or it might be sort of compelling to the right brain or left brain, the people who are more interested in statistics and numbers and kind of quantification.
So I do remember this very distinctly because I've been in the news business the whole time, that at one point it got a reputation for being very dark.
That's right.
And there was
satanic.
some satanic, and what was that all about?
Well,
was it real?
Well, it's the kind of the similar complaint that we often hear around rock and roll music, rap music, heavy metal music, violent video games as another manifestation of this sort of hysteria, where there's a couple celebrated cases of a kid who does something a little bit out of the ordinary. In the early 1980s, it was a case of someone who may or may not have committed suicide or may or may not have played the game. Because the game is very involving and because you could theoretically spend many hours playing and obsessing about the game and its rules, there are always parents who are going to worry. The particular issue about the darkness was there were some religious right commentators who actually believed that when I cast a spell in the game, I say my character is going to cast a spell, that literally there was a demon being summoned in the basement of my, that was, of course, completely ludicrous.
So 40 years, why has this endured? I mean, a lot of games have kind of stuck around, Clue among them, but there were some other great games of the 70s and 80s. In my guess, you don't see any more life and those kind of Risk.
Right. Risk is still around. Risk is still around. Yep. This game endures, I think, partly because it was so unique. But I think more importantly, it endures even though the number of people who play today will probably never reach its heyday in the 1980s. But the foundations of so much of what we see in the video game industry is based on all of the mechanics and the kind of ways that the Dungeons & Dragons game was devised, so that we wouldn't have the popularity of video games were it not for Dungeons & Dragons. We wouldn't have the popularity of any kind of role-playing situation. Think of Facebook as a role-playing situation. Think of Match.com as a role-playing situation.
True.
You're putting your best foot forward. You're kind of perhaps lying or sort of creating this idealized version of yourself, which is really what this is about. In some ways. So the roots of it, and many of our creative leaders in film and in writing, Junot Diaz, Stephen Colbert, Vin Diesel, all these people played D&D, and they would argue that were it not for that game, it wouldn't have sort of sparked their imaginations.
See you in another 40.
Exactly. I hope so.
Ethan Gilsdorf, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.